Hello, everyone. Hi. Welcome to Kelly Ryder's house. I'm not from Kelly Ryder's house. I just am at the mic. So anyway, welcome. My name is Jamal Ilyas. I'm the director of the Wolf Humanities Center, and I'm really delighted with this event that we're having in partnership with Kelly Ryder's house and the English department. And we're welcoming Wendy Steiner, who is the Richard L. Fisher Professor of English Emerita, back to the University of Pennsylvania, and to talk about her most recent book, The Beauty of Choice. Um, I'll I'll give Wendy Steiner's full introduction in a minute, but one of the reasons why it's really great is that Wendy is the founding director of Penn's Humanities Center. So for me, it's really wonderful and meaningful, and for everyone else who works there, it's really wonderful to have her back here. And for me, it's wonderful because, well, not wonderful. Because it's my last semester doing this. So I become a emeritus director of the center along with Wendy in a couple of months. So the beauty of choice offers a dazzling new account of aesthetics grounded in female agency through a series of linked meditations on canonical and contemporary literature and art. Wendy Steiner casts women's tastes as the engine of liberal values. She reframes long-standing questions surrounding desire, art, sexual assault, and beauty in light of Me Too. Beginning with an opera that she wrote based on Chaucer's The Wife of Bot's Tale, she presents women's sexual choices as fundamentally aesthetic in nature, expressions of their taste, and artworks as stagings of choice in courtship, coquetry, consent, marriage, and liberation. A merger of art criticism, evolutionary theory, political theory, and aesthetics, this book paints the struggle between female autonomy and patriarchal violence and extremisms as the essence of art. And, again, just as a small aside, our current kind of moment in the life of this republic, it's particularly timely. I wish it wasn't as timely, but it is. So what we're going to have is first, Wendy Steiner is going to give a reading from her new book. And after that, she's going to sit down with Heather Love, who's a professor in the English department, for a conversation about topics broadly ranging around this particular issue. So just to introduce both of them quickly, and then I'll get out of the way. So Wendy Steiner, as I said, is the Richard Fisher Professor Emerita of English here at Penn. And she was also the chair of the English department. As I just mentioned, she was also the founding director of the Penn Humanities Forum, which is now the Wolf Humanities Center. And she is the author of many books. The Real Thing, The Model of the Mirror of Art, that's one. Venus in Exile, The Rejection of Beauty in the 20th Century. The Scandal of Pleasure, Art in an Age of Fundamentalism, which was listed by the New York Times as one of the 100 best books of 1997. She writes a lot on cultural criticism. She has written opera Liparetti, which have been actually performed in different places, and she has also presented multimedia installations at the Venice Biennales twice. So that's a lot. Heather is, again, professor of English and professor at Penn's in the English department. She's the author of Feeling Backward, Lost in the Politics of Queer History, also Underdog, Social Deviance and Queer Theory, and she's edited a number of special issues of journals, one of GLQ on rethinking sex, and another co-edited special issue of Representations on description across disciplines. And she has published Literary Studies in Human Flourishing, which was co-edited with Jim English, who's sitting right there. Heather Love has written on topics including comparative social stigma, compulsory happiness, transgender fiction, spinster aesthetics, and reading methods in literary studies. And she's right now working on a new project called To Be Real, concerning the use of the personal in queer writing. So please welcome Wendy, and then after and also we'll have a reception and book signing afterwards. Sorry, please. I didn't want them to run away before getting the book.
So, do I just advance it? No. I have to change the thing altogether. Ah, there we go. Okay. Well, is this okay? Um, Thank you so much, Jamal, for the introduction, and thank you to Heather for participating in this conversation, and to Sarah Varney for organizing this event, and thank you all for coming and for the people online to be watching. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to be here for me, not just for all the usual reasons that are involved in having the possibility of speaking, but I just moved back to Philadelphia last week, and so this feels like a kind of welcome on a big scale, and I do think of both Philadelphia and this university as the kind of base for the values that I express in this book. So it means a lot to me to speak here. My new book, which came out in July, is The Beauty of Choice. And the cover of it contains a detail from this sculpture, which is a monument. As you can see, it's called Eroinat, or Heroines. And it is a memorial to the rape victims of Kosovo during the genocide of 1998 to 99. It's one of the very few memorials to rape victims in the whole world. And it's quite a remarkable phenomenon, this work. It's called Heroines in order to recast the identity, I guess, or the image of rape victims who are traditionally despised in Kosovo. The image on the memorial, of course, is a relief of a woman's head, and that head is a computer-generated composite of a whole lot of photographs of Kosovar women. And the varying length of the pins, you can see them particularly under the woman's nose there, are what create the relief. And on the head of each of the pins is a small cast of that is identical to the larger face. So it is a work that has a lot of implications for the relationship between individuals and society, individuals and collectivity, the part and whole, and so on. And I don't have time to go into that now, but it's a very profound sort of contemplation of what the place of an individual in a society is. There are 20,000 pins composing this head, one for each of the rape victims, and each pinhood is intended as a medal honoring a heroine. So I discuss this in great detail near the end of my book because this Eroinat brings together with such clarity the issues of female freedom and art. So I'd like to explain that by backtracking a little at this point. Over my last few books before this, I had been developing a theory of beauty as an interaction, not as the typical kind of neoclassical orthodoxy of beauty as a transcendence of the here and now, of our embodied being, of history, our historical being, of time, and so forth, into a state of disinterested interest. But instead, beauty thought of as a special kind of interaction between a person and something else, could be a person, another person, or a thing, in which the person not only feels pleasure feel in that thing, but sees him or herself feeling that pleasure. And the recognition of that pleasure, the discovery of that pleasure, the realization of one's taste, one's pleasure in something else, it becomes a kind of revelation of one's identity. And of course, one's likes and dislikes change over time frequently, but so does one's sense of identity change over time a lot too, or it can. It certainly develops and so on. And so for me, this way of thinking about beauty as a kind of fundamental building block of identity, one might say, is a way of replacing I think, therefore I am with I like, therefore I am, a kind of replacement of rationalism with emotion and and pleasure and many of the other things that are involved in aesthetic experience. So the I like is a person's constantly developing sense of identity, but it's also connected with other people, because when we like something, we're aware that not everybody likes it, or some people like it. What are they like? If they like it, how do I relate to them, and so on. In other words, the experience of one's taste is a social experience as well as an extremely personal one. And one might therefore say, I like, therefore we are, as a way of thinking about these. Many women writers and artists and many female characters throughout history have expressed these ideas. For example, Sei Shonagon, a lady in waiting to the Empress of Japan in around the year 1000, was renowned for her refinement as a poet and as a wearer of clothing and as an expresser of good manners and many other, all the other a musician and various other courtly attributes. She wrote the Pillow Book, which is a kind of diary or commonplace book. She wrote it in installments over a long period of time. And in the Pillow Book, she presents no less than 164 lists of things that she likes or dislikes. And some of them are sort of arbitrary and, petty seeming, but some of them are very profound as well. I mean, anything that she likes gets into those lists. But she also presented her rationale for this concentration on taste, for this preoccupation with her taste. She said, if I can spread out a finely woven green straw mat and examine the white bordering with its vivid black patterns, I somehow feel that I cannot turn my back on this world, and life actually seems precious to me. And then she goes on almost seamlessly from this idea of the value of aesthetic experience to the idea of gender justice. She says, how shameful when a man seduces some helpless court lady and, having made her pregnant, abandons her without caring in the slightest about her future. So it's sort of striking that that in the year 1000 in Japan, somebody was thinking about taste in this way, about the situation of women, and about the conflict that women have when their freedom of choice is infringed. Here's another character from the fast past, one of my favorites, the wife of Bath from the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer. She's a touchstone character in the history of women and aesthetics. The tale that she tells in the Canterbury Tales is of a knight who has raped a maiden and is condemned to death unless he can find the answer to the question, what do women want most? And he has a year to find it, and he gets a million answers. He doesn't know what to think about all that. And finally, he meets a loathly lady, an ugly old lady, who has the answer, which is that women want mastery in marriage. And I won't bore you with the interpretation, the course of the interpretation, but what she means is self-determination within a loving situation, and an interactive situation, one might say. So I find this tale to be a profound meditation on female freedom of choice and the process of negotiating a just and pleasing power share between men and women. It is a simply stunning precursor to the philosophy of liberal democracy, which was developed centuries later by Hobbes and Locke. Many of the same ideas about self-determination are worked out in that tale, interestingly enough. And just to follow through with a little bit of local color, so preoccupied have I been with this character that my first opera was based on the wife of Bath's tale. It was called The Loathly Lady. And it was performed for the first time in honor of the 10th anniversary of the Penn Humanities Forum. Without Jennifer and Sarah, who are in the audience, it never would have happened. So I have, and since then I've written another 5 operas, all of which are concerned in one way or another with these questions of female taste and freedom of choice and so on. So I would say, in general, that my creative and my scholarly work have focused on these questions. However, after my last book came out, The Real Thing, Real Thing, in 2010, I was getting sort of discouraged about the whole enterprise. The world was being confronted with all kinds of terrible situations, which are still with us now. Wars and climate change and the rise of totalitarianism everywhere and so on. And it wasn't clear that another book on beauty was important enough to worry about at this time. I was introduced to somebody at a party, a woman who asked me what I did, and I said that I was an esthetician, and she got all excited, and she told me about this great facial she had recently. So I figured, this is it. The world does not need my services in this way. But during COVID, I heard about a new book that had come out by Richard O. Prum, who is an evolutionary ornithologist at Yale. And it was called The Evolution of Beauty. And since beauty was in the title, I figured I should read it, and I ordered it and was astonished. I was flabbergasted by this book because it traversed exactly the same ideas, the same ground in considering the beauty in the world of animals as I had been considering with beauty in the human and artistic sphere. Both Prum, and he comes right out of Darwin and the theory of sexual selection, for both of them, females are the choosers when it comes to mates. Males display, hoping to be chosen, and females make the decision. So their function as maters is to enact choices. And for Darwin, as well as for Prum and many, many other people, the basis of this choice that they make is taste. They describe sexual selection as an aesthetic matter, where an individual chooses the mate that pleases her, right? That most pleases her. And often that involves comparison shopping and all kinds of things like that to find the one that pleases her most. So, for example, peacocks. The peacocks, are the poster birds of evolution. Their wonderful tail feathers evolved because peahens really liked them, and they wanted to mate with peacocks that had these feathers, or more of these feathers, or bigger ones of these feathers, and therefore those were the peacocks that passed their genes along, and in this developing way, the tails got showier and bigger and so on as time went on. But the real example of examples is the bowerbird, who the male builds these very large bowers, which are not nests. They are, as Prum calls them, seduction theaters. And they are sort of enclosed spaces that are decorated with everything under the sun. And they truly are miraculously beautiful. But apparently, the most successful bowerbirds are the ones, in terms of attracting a mate, are the ones that build an escape route into them. Because what females do is to go from bower to bower to bower when in mating season, checking out the bower and the dancing bowerbird inside. And they want to be free, apparently, to choose the one that most pleases them. And so over eons, those have been the most successful males, and that building strategy has become more widespread, and there are escape routes built into that for women. So one might think of the I like, as pervading the animate world, and Prum even talks about plants in that way, which is beyond me. But this is the I like, the expression of taste, the response to beauty. These are not just nice things that happen in your life, but they actually change the species. So I began reading that. I began to think that aesthetics is not irrelevant to important matters that go on in the world, and that, in fact, the experience of beauty, this interaction in which you learn who you are and that you want to protect beyond anything else in making choices, is a kind of model of self-realization and freedom. Moreover, it's suffused, reinforced with pleasure, which is a very nice thing. And as soon as I began to think about that, I thought of the centrality of male display and female choosing all through literature. I mean, how many fairy tales and stories are about people choosing, the best of three, candidates for, to marry the prince or marry the princess or that sort of thing. How many works of art are about foiled choices, interference in choices? I mean, making a bad choice, Portrait of a Lady, having your parents interfere with your freedom, Romeo and Juliet. I mean, just begin to start thinking about this, and you'll see how fundamental this story is to our artistic experience. And even in something like Ulysses, James Joyce's Ulysses, and especially there, and, hundreds and hundreds of pages of the most, fabulous and exciting male display of two male characters, Stephen Dedalus and Leopold Bloom, of world culture in every, in the most abstruse and wonderful sorts of ways. And it goes on and on and on. But what is it that finishes the book? Molly, the wife of Bloom's monologue, that ends in the moment when the day that she chose Bloom as her husband, and her act of choosing. The very last words of the book are, "And yes, I said yes, I will, yes." So, the beauty of choice then presents these ideas, but it also goes over a number of female artists who have worked with the idea of interactivity in beauty and expressed this theme. And I can't do justice to any of them in such a setting, but I just wanted, maybe you can look at the book and see them discussed in detail there. But I just wanted to show you some of the images for briefly. So first, Kristen Beeler, who now lives in Scotland but is American, and she is very enamored of the Mutter Museum. In fact, she has had a long ongoing project called Rag and Bone, in which she becomes involved with people who often were her friends to start with, talking to them, and people who were disfigured in some way, who are scarred, or what, the words we have for this are unfortunate: scarred, maimed, ugly, those kinds of words. By rethinking their disfigurements, she makes works of art. And the idea is that they, through this interactions, come to value themselves much more and to see beauty in this interactive situation. So here was a woman called Claudette, who was a friend of hers who had a mastectomy, and Beeler has made a number of brooches based on that scar. The thing on the right is a brooch, a big brooch, but it's kind of a prosthesis for a breast, for the missing breast. Or this one of Suzanne Rameljak, who was the editor of Metalsmith magazine, which is the preeminent jewelry art magazine. She had just had a surgery when this was done, and Beeler staged her as Venus de Milo with a scar. And as part of a sort of thought process on the idea of female beauty and classical treatments of it and so on. Or Barbara McCallum, who is a delightful, wonderful American woman, who, and a kind of wife of Bath character in a way, in that she thinks of her artworks as representations and expressions of her marriage. Her husband is Robert E. Johnson, who's a planetary physicist, and also he is her model. And so they've been married for 50 years, and so her art is a kind of an ongoing interaction with him, in which she casts parts of his torso or arms, and then dresses them with these amazing garments that she creates out of the pages of his obsolete physics articles. And the titles that each work gets, the title that each work gets is the name of the article that she has recreated in this way. And she subjects these pages to what she thinks of as women's work. She washes them and dries them and wrings them out and bakes them and boils them and burns them and sews them together into these rather sophisticated, amazing garments. And of course, each one of these installations is the work of a year at least of labor on her part. And you can see around the neck there the some of the words of the pages, the print on the pages that she has preserved in this creation, or this one. Some of them are racy, in which there are 3 casts of her husband, and she thinks of this one as a kind of representation of the emotions that go into creativity and science, which she considers the same emotions as what goes on in the creation of art. And she has a kind of thing about science, because scientists get so much more credit in the world and so much more money in the world than artists do. And yet, according to her, they're involved in the same kind of process, except that what they turn out is inaccessible to almost anybody except another scientist, and it's dry and boring and everything in her view. So she turns it into art by doing all these things. And you can see in the jockstrap that she has in the detail that she's actually covered in the title page image of his name from many copies of these off-print. I asked him how he feels about this. Can I show this slide and all that? And he said, what's the difference? Why not? Why not? So I hope it's not offensive to you. And here we go. Marlene Dumas lives in Amsterdam, has lived there for a long time, but she's a South African by birth. And her way of thinking of interacting or of experiencing interactive beauty is to interact with modernist painters who were almost always men and who were cutting female experience and the feminine image out of art in a very programmatic way in the 20th century. So here's Barnett Newman, an American's geometric abstraction, The Gate, which hangs in the Stedelijk in Amsterdam, and there's Marlene Dumas' The Gate. Which, gateway to heaven and all that kind of thing. I mean, she's a very coarse lady, and I'm not going to hide that, but the idea is to put back into art all that has been removed from it with this male modernist scalpel that she disapproves of so much. Or Picasso, who is an artist whom she reveres, but who treated the women in his life very badly. So there are his 2 nudes from 1909. There's Dumas' painting of Merritt Oppenheimer based on a photograph by Man Ray, which evokes some of the same feel, and it's called Missing Picasso, which is a kind of, I miss Picasso, yeah, sure. But it's also, he's not here, but I am, kind of thing. There are many implications to this. Or this one, this is a very infamous painting of Dora Maar, Weeping Woman. She was an artist who was one of his mistresses and whom he caused a great deal of suffering in. And here is Marlene Dumas' rendition of Dora Maar, again based on a photographic portrait by Man Ray, but painted in oil in a very beautiful and striking way. And what she's done is to change the direction of this. Dora Maar, the woman who saw Picasso cry. So it's not she who is crying, but she who is observing the other cry. And this reversal is what Dumas was after. So there are many other examples in the book, and I hope you'll look into them. But I wanted to end bravely with a stanza from song cycle that I wrote. The artist or the composer, who was a man, very happily composed the rest of them, but he refrained from composing this. It's okay, but I wanted to use it somewhere, so I used it in my book. It's a response to the Women's March in Washington in 2017. It in many ways encompasses the same issues that I've been talking about. So our founding fathers framed no articles on pussy. The word arrived in the archive centuries later via a bus driving to make America great again. 1 million women crocheted woolen wombs in answering shades of shocking pink and marched for life and liberty, mocking a man's pursuit of happiness. So, on that note, maybe we can close up the thing, and maybe Heather and I can begin. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Wendy.
Thank you.
It's such a pleasure to see. I mean, part of what's so striking about this book is all the art that you've sort of curated into the book. So it was great to see some of that work displayed. I think it's some really interesting material, and you're just doing so much in this book. It's really exciting. This is maybe low-hanging fruit, but women's choice as a driver for history, as a kind of key to liberalism. I've lived through the last 9 days, as all of you have, and with the death of liberalism being announced widely and women's choice severely curtailed. So, I found this book, it's a very heavy book in a way, with, so much work on sexual violence and so on, but it's also a very hopeful book, I think, in terms of its sort of vision of the future. So I just wanted to give you a chance to kind of think about, what it's been like to sort of bring this book out in this moment, and can we still hope for female choice as the sort of key to democracy and freedom and a liberal future?
I think we can. I mean, it's been going on for a long time, this is obviously a terrible time. The fact that some women are responsible in part for the situation that we're in is devastating. But I think that the values that I'm talking about in this book, which are tolerance and equality and freedom and self-expression and so on, are perennial human desires, not just from women, obviously, for men as well, And I can't, the history of their unfolding from cave men and women to the modern period has been rocky and bumpy and so on. And we're going through a terrible period. But I think about how the world was for my mother, for example, who was not allowed to work because my father said, no wife of mine is going to work, and who was, couldn't drive and couldn't, et cetera, all the things we know about. Things have changed enormously. And in the last, up until the last 9 years or so, things were evolving in the most extraordinarily quick way. I mean, the new kinds of gender freedoms that were becoming available for people, the things that could be discussed openly in places, the moving beyond kind of either or binarisms, which I take a lot of time in the book to talk about that, because it's so easy to get, and modernism itself was totally bogged down in binary thinking that produced extremely bad results. I think, I mean, it's not that the art was bad or something like that, but it's not the art that we would necessarily want to go on having. Anyway, I really think that we have to hold on to our liberalism. In spite of the fact that it makes one look like a wimp and it's not popular, and there's so many ways in which liberalism gets blamed for this situation, which is nuts. I mean, it may be that, the beginnings of liberal philosophy in the 17th century accepted all kinds of conditions that were that we would think of as immoral and illiberal in the extreme. I mean, only men and only landowners could be citizens in that philosophy. Well, I mean, that's ridiculous, but implicit in the argumentation behind it was the unfolding of greater and greater freedoms for more and more people, and we have to believe in that. It seems to me that we are at we are involved with structures of thought, and particularly art, and art is particularly one of those, which helps to broaden freedoms. And, every once in a while it impedes that process as well. I mean, nothing moves in a straightforward way. But, I really, because it broke my heart in the run-up to the first, to 2016, when liberals of one sort or another would put down liberalism. Stanley Fish and even Obama sometimes, and people, it's as if a badge of honor were to put down the philosophy or the theory that was creating justice in the world, or and I think we have to resist that. I really do.
Okay, great. Maybe I can zero in on something I found really interesting in the book, and I hadn't really thought about this, but it's sort of through the work on sexual selection, and the idea that because female choice has driven freedom, but it's also driven evolution, right? That sort of and that you kind of put out this idea that men have sort of evolved or are evolving in relationship to female choice. I hadn't heard this before, right? That, the sort of decline in matricide and the kind of less hairy bodies and the sort of...
No fangs.
Exactly, right? So these are all things that women might prefer, right?
Yeah.
It's like having the exit out of the bower.
Right.
So
not just prefer, but those things also give men less power over women and fewer ways of interfering with their freedom of choice. And I mean that's
yeah. No, so I mean I found that super interesting, and again, just to kind of keep on this slightly maybe downhearted path, but but just to think about the rise. I mean, because say I teach gender and sexuality, and 10, 15 years ago, my queer theory class would include a day on metrosexuality, right? The idea that or when I just taught this 1972 manifesto, the Gay Liberation Front manifesto, that said, gay leads the way, right? Heterosexual people are going to learn from gay people, how to have different ideas of gender and how to have more mutuality in their relationships and stuff, right? And I was not batting an eyelash. I was like, yeah, this is all true,
sure.
Right? So, it's not only the rise of, authoritarianism and illiberal forms of government, but it's also the sort of masculinity that has emerged in relation to this, right? The sort of strongman. I mean, it's strongman regimes, and I think this latest election is largely lost and won around legislating masculinity, and
right.
And all of these sort of kind of very chagrined liberals saying, Hillary Clinton, during the Hillary Clinton run, we said the future is female. That was a big mistake, right? So, I mean, your book kind of says the future is female. I mean, that's kind of what I hear from that. And that's such a focus of sort of self-flagellation right now. So I wanted maybe to hear what you thought about this kind of like, are men still on the right path? Are they still evolving in relation to female choice, or are we seeing something else happening now?
Well, I think that, what we're seeing is obviously the backlash to a whole lot of that opening up. But on the other hand, so many people are so relieved by the relaxation of prior constraints that I think that those constraints are not going to reappear overnight again and stay there forever or anything like that. I mean, and I think an education that relativizes binaries is something. It sounds abstract and but I think that means something to people, to mean something to everyday people, to not always have to sort of judge what you're doing as whether this is what a girl does or what a boy does, and so on. And I think, and look at apparently in the polls that have been taken, most Americans, or the majority of Americans, are okay with the idea of transsexual rights. Gay marriage is law, hopefully for a while longer. These are huge changes. Look at Obama at first was hesitant about that and then changed his mind. And I think lots and lots of people were hesitant at first and changed their mind. And I think this, people's worldview changes. But it's a shock when it does, and if you change it too much, it's really shocking, and there's resistance to it. But I just can't believe that we're going back. There's a view of history that says we're now in the 1920s, and we're about to go. The 2020s, but it's kind of a redoing of that, and we're about to enter the 30s, and World War and so on are going to follow soon, and it's all a cycle, and fascism is going to have its day again. And undoubtedly fascism is having its sort of day right now, and this could happen, and it's really, really scary. But I think that the rest of the history of the world is not going to be a history of fascism.
Okay, can I quote you on that?
Can I bank on I said that today.
Okay. All right, great. Well, maybe I'll change course a little bit just so we can have a little mental relief from thinking about these people. But I think one of the things that's quite interesting in the book is because you've worked on so many different artistic movements, and you've got all of this art by these amazing female artists, but you've also thought a lot about a kind of misogynist male artists, right? You've really earned that kind of Picasso work there from your prior work. And so one thing I was curious about was, art itself is such a value for you, and also the sort of spread of art, of the education in art, is a kind of path to democracy. But I was just sort of curious about is there art that is sort of beyond the pale for you? Are there sort of misogynist or negative forms of art that you think don't serve this function of democracy, right? You always suggest that art kind of allows for this sort of self-reflection, right? You sort of self-consciousness about your taste and about your pleasure, and that it starts a conversation, right? But I just wondered if there is a kind of, is that all art, or are you talking about a subset of art when you make that claim?
Well, in 1995, when I published The Scandal of Pleasure, I gave 1 million talks, and somebody would have inevitably say about Andres Serrano's Piss Christ, I find this work offensive, and it shouldn't be shown, and it shouldn't have been blah, 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 blah. And or Mapplethorpe's representations. And my response was, well, I'm offended about a lot of things in the world, but so what? That's too bad. I'm offended. why is it that people feel that if they are offended, it's a catastrophe or something? And even works, I mean, look at, you know very well, as somebody who had to pass all those exams in English, how many of the classic texts that we deal with are anti-Semitic, racist. They're beautiful works of art, and we love them, and they're formative, and we wouldn't ever want to stop them from being read, but they contain material that is appalling, right? What is our response to that supposed to be? Well, the whole point is that they are couched, or they exist in a world of what we might think of as inquiry. That when you enter the world of an artwork, you're saying, do I like this? Do I not like this? Can I support this? Is it insupportable? And so it's sort of like a taste and aesthetic experience are like a crucible for the investigation of ethics in human experience. And I that's immensely valuable. I mean, it's necessary for humans to have this sphere in which they can consider. And so, the most disgusting screed in art can still cause you to say, that's the most disgusting screed I've ever seen in art, I mean, and that's a valuable thing. People thought that way at one time.
Right.
I mean, that's amazing,
Yeah, okay. So I'm very persuaded by your kind of arguments across your career, and just from knowing you about kind of the sort of misogyny that's implicit in a certain kind of minimalism, or a certain kind of, modernist, let's say, negation of the world, and your kind of interest in beauty and ornament, and the flesh as a kind of, as in itself having a kind of feminist argument in it, right, and sort of a kind of wariness of, or a critique of art that sort of denies that element of art and of existence, really. So one of the things that, in a book about choice, and one of the things that you mention is that, some kind of, some new environmental movements, and particularly kind of degrowth kind of movements, right, sort of have that kind of anhedonic, right, anti-pleasure, anti-consumption kind of bent, and that you would sort of link this to this kind of tradition of sort of refusal of choice. And I mean I find that very persuasive.
However,
there's a but here, right, which is that to say, I mean, something has to happen in relationship to consumption,
right.
Because we are facing climate disaster, planetary disaster. So, the beauty of choice, if we think about choice in relationship to consumption, right, consumer choice, then, there's parts of it that aren't beautiful in the present, right? So I wanted to just give you a chance to kind of talk through that sort of very difficult, I think, question.
Right. I have a whole section on waste, and the idea of beauty as waste. It begins with the adage, waste not, want not, which I interpret as being, if you don't waste it, you don't want it. But extravagance and excess are crucial aspects of the experience of beauty for in many situations. The idea of, the idea of the sublime, the classical idea of the sublime is limitlessness, and to have that experience of not being constrained anymore is something that people often value. That so the question is, how do we square that with living in the world, a finite world that is in trouble right now in terms of resources and human welfare and so on? And I sort of tie that in to the whole history in the 20th century of waste thinking, the wasteland, for example, which which is a kind of so in other words, there has been a long history of thinking of waste as just bad, 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 and beauty, because it's involved in extravagance, is bad, bad, bad in the same sort of way. It's useless, and at a time when we're pressured, it's an indulgence that we can't afford. And it seems to me, what I tried to do in that chapter, but it's really hard, is to get away from this the either-or idea. And there are a whole series of, as I show, of postmodern novels that try to undo the idea of waste as bad, 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 and to show that instead there are other ways of thinking about things. And really, that's what I'm trying to do there. I'm not advocating the end of going on diets and the end of constraint and wild spending and all the rest of it. And indeed, consumerism is a kind of a misunderstanding, it seems to me, of what the pleasure of exuberance and limitlessness is really about. I think that is, but I think that's a very complicated distinction for people to make in their own lives. When you don't have enough money, there are many necessities and pleasures that you just don't have access to. And so it's very natural for people to think that the more money I have, the happier I'll be, and all that sort of thing. And all of us, I think, as we, insofar as we grow up and have salaries, stop being graduate students and all that sort of thing, negotiate with ourselves a kind of a balance between wild, happy exuberance on the one hand and economy on the other hand. And finding that balance is what is an important part of who you are as well. And I really think that the experience of beauty as excess and extravagance in a controlled situation is very educational in that way. First of all, it lets off certain kinds of steam and gives you a virtual experience of what is forbidden or impossible in normal life. But it also makes you back off from that. There are many plot structures, the romance and so on, that are based on extreme gratification, and then the falling away that comes when reality hits you after the kind of dreamlike experience before that. And that structure is itself a kind of a learning device for handling economy and the way that economy infuses our lives.
Yeah. Okay.
Best I can
That's great. I want to make sure that we have time to take questions from the audience. So I might just open it up at this point if people have questions. And in the back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Steiner. In order to have the spectrum of the choice, the spectrum of the choice,
what?
the complete spectrum, what do you think of abstinence and prostitution as a choice for a woman? What triggered my question is, I am very religious, right? In the Bible, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we have, the Bible tells us, if you wanted to reclaim a prostitute and marry her, right? Marry her and stay abstinent from her for 6 months. It's almost that period of abstinence for the prostitute. You bring her from the street, you marry her she's your sister for 6 months. Then after that, so in the Bible, it's almost, it tells you those 6 months of abstinence for the prostitute, and she's the lady now. It's kind of it heal the experience, right? And I think the same prescription, could be could be a retreat for a rape victim as well. So maybe a good relationship with asexual relationship for the rape victim for 6 months before, you know what I mean? So my question again is that what do you think of abstinence as a valid option for a valid choice for a female? She could be a nun, but she could also be a bro, right? And the biblical, the Judeo-Christian tradition, it gives us a good, excellent model. If you are a good man, you are poor, you can't get married, get yourself, 6 months. What do you think?
Well, if it seems to me that abstinence, if you want to be abstinent, is who's going to stop you? Why should that not be?
The other way.
The I'm.
If you want to use the opposite of abstinence, which become a prostitute.
No, not. I mean, that would be to charge for
You
your.
are not for prostitution as a choice.
It doesn't seem to me that prostitution versus abstinence is an opposition that I recognize. I mean, I would say wild sexual expression on the one hand and abstinence, that would be an opposition, right?
But they are quintessential human choice. You don't see an animal prostitute. You don't see an animal nun. You know what I mean? But you see a human. You see a human abstinent woman. A nun, Mother Teresa, for example, and you see Alberto Moravia, for example, from famous novel.
Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Let's take another question. You have a mic? Jerry, right over here on this side.
Wendy, what relation do you see between choice and power? It goes also with the notion of expenditure, extravagance, and so on and so forth, because you know about the potlatch and that kind of ritual,
Right,
etc.
right. I mean, there are so many ways of creating power, right? That we can create power for each other, or we can take power for ourselves. It can be a social matter or an individual competition matter in this way. But obviously, choice requires power in some way, power over ourselves. And this is something that Aquinas talked about. I mean, this is where what Chaucer and the Wife of Bath, in a way, were coming from, self-possession. The point is, I mean, I remember going to a talk where by a classicist who had done some number crunching kind of study of life in ancient Rome, and had come to the conclusion that slaves, I know this sounds terrible, slaves had no fun. Slaves never had any moments in their lives that were good moments. And this seemed to me a total impossibility, that nobody, it's like Caliban in The Tempest, thought is free, that nobody can stop you from liking things. They can stop you from having the things that you like, but they can't stop you from liking them and from enjoying the experience of liking and from understanding yourself better through liking. That is, if you're in the most disempowered situation, you can still experience pleasures, it seems to me, although obviously it would be much better if you weren't so disempowered.
Okay, sorry. We'll wait for the microphone.
Hi. So I don't really know how to phrase it into a question necessarily, but I'm just going to tell you what I'm thinking. You spoke about how obviously there is power in women's choices, and I think that we've been mistakenly taught that women don't have any power, and I think that there's a little bit of an illusion of choice. And my question was, a lot of women's choices in regards to partnerships primarily focus on safety. So even with the bowerbirds, like the more successful ones were the ones that provided an opportunity for escape. And so I'm curious if pleasure or choice ever really do come freely to women if we are consistently factoring in these things.
If
that
we consistently what?
If we're consistently factoring in things like our safety, like our freedom, as opposed to engaging with pleasure in its most raw form, oftentimes we do have to kind of subdue some of that in order to make the better choice. Yeah, that's just what I'm thinking. I don't know how to phrase that into a question necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I get what you're asking, and maybe you can keep on asking it so we refine this. But you were saying that within the family, when women can either be seen as powerless or not powerless, or powerful, right? And that that has to do with how they give up some of their power. Is that
Or even what I kind of, if I can just say, I think I kind of heard that, like, if women are making an aesthetic, sexual, erotic choice, that they can't just consult their own pleasure. They also have to think about the risk of danger. And I mean, you certainly think a lot about that because you think so much about sexual violence in the book. So
right?
is there such a thing as sort of women's unconstrained aesthetic choice when it comes to choosing a man? Because they do have to sort of, maybe you like a really, bad boy, manly man, right? But like, he can't be trusted or whatever, right? Like that would be sort of one example of, I think, what you're talking about.
I think the question of choice itself, or the experience of choice itself, is so explosive, so charged, emotionally charged for people, that it can be, the taking away of choice can be a tragedy, but it can also be an exciting, fraught situation, depending on where it happens and what kind of ultimate control happens around it. And I do think that, in that, I'm not trying to get out of answering this question, but I think that has a lot to do with the way that we experience art and beauty itself, which on the one hand, we like to say, I like this, I've chosen to like it, I'm in control of this situation. But when we say things like, it's attractive, that means that it's exerting power over me. And that there's something about the ambiguity of that, which is there in every experience of liking, where you can't tell which direction, because it's both directions, obviously. It's an interaction. That's the whole idea. And there's something about that ambiguity which is so powerful and so interesting and so illuminating, or confusing, depending on where you are you're thinking about all this, that I think of as a really valuable, important thing. And there are a whole lot of artworks that are, what is going on, that are concerned with that are, that walk that knife edge between, and enjoy that knife edge between exerting power and being taken over in that way.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry. In the front. Yeah.
Hi, I was curious if you had any thoughts on the value of choice based on the number of options. So like the idea that like the power that choice gives you can increase or diminish or change based on the number of options that are present or available or conceptive.
It's such an interesting question, isn't it? Because, I mean, a lot of people feel it's like when you go surfing the web, you want to buy something, and 10 days later you're because there are so many options on the web, and you think of that as freedom, right? Freedom means lots of options as opposed to only one or two. And see, these are all, it's where economics and aesthetics seem to me to be so connected in a certain way. But attention is a limited sort of thing, and attention and the ability to respond aesthetically are very tied to each other. When you're exhausted by all these choices, often meaningless choices or undecidable choices, it stops being fun. It stops being an exciting situation of choice, and it just becomes a dull slog through a million meaningless choices. And it reminds me of the idea of Bourdieu's distinction, where class and status and so on are tied to the projection of meaningless but socially coded choices, that it doesn't make any difference whether you part your hair on this side or that side unless it does, right? And so I think one of the things that we're working, the internet has changed the world profoundly. Forget almost anything else. We're victim. I don't mean victims of it, but we're really processing all the time, processing what it means to live in an information society and all the rest of it. And it's a difficult thing. I feel sorry for us. I think we've had a lot to go through in the last couple of decades. And strains on our ability to choose and what it means to choose are part of that.
I think maybe we'll just take one more question because we don't want to keep everybody too long. But I think Austin in the front.
Hi, Professor Steiner. Thank you so much for that talk. I wondered if you might talk about where aesthetic education shows up in the book. I'm thinking about your examples through evolutionary aesthetics, through Prüm, and the rendering of taste to these instinctual naturalized relationships, and this discussion that we've been having in the Q&A about nobody can stop you from liking everything. But of course, after the Enlightenment invention of beauty and the sublime, we get 200 years of thinking about how do you train people to like the things you want them to like.
Yeah, exactly.
So
and that didn't start in the 18th century. That's always been part of education. Yes, I do talk about that in the book, and in the 18th century, one of the things that Kant says is there's always a reason why people can't believe that beauty was an established sort of unchanging sort of thing, and if somebody didn't recognize it, there was something wrong with them. And what was wrong with them was that their senses were deficient. So everything that has to do with disability was part of that, or they were women, or they were poor, or they didn't go to the right schools, or so in other words, it became a way of sort of saying, if you agree with me, then you know what beauty is, and if you don't, then forget it, because I'm the right kind of person. And education, of course, for a long time was that. I was recently talking to a philosopher whose father was an extremely distinguished composer, and he in England, and he said of something that she had just written. All these examples. When I was in school, we didn't we didn't study those things. Why don't you just talk about the things that we know about, and then we'll all have the same sort of reference points, and we'll all know what we're talking about, and these other things they're irrelevant anyway, because they're not really as good as those things. I mean, the history of my time in academia has been a history of the revision of canon in English, and so has it been in virtually every field of the humanities, I'm sure. But so where does education really come into this? As I said, the experience of beauty is not just individual, although it is profoundly and powerfully individual. It has to do with our place as social beings as well, or our situation as social beings as well. And learning and understanding how our choices relate to other people's choices is really an important thing that we do. I mean, so I walked into this room tonight worried about some of those images that I showed you, because I really didn't know whether, given the current situation in the world and the fact that I've been away from pen for 10 years or more, I didn't know what it was like around here and what people were likely to like. So, it's not just for my peace of mind that it's a good thing to understand what other people's choices are like. It's part of how we situate ourselves in the world in relation to other people. I mean, just think of all those industries that are, the movie industry and the classical music and museums and all those kinds of things are operating in this kind of complicated situation of kind of historical norms operating in the various arts, changing conditions on the ground in 1,000 different ways, changing audiences who may never, education itself, which is in flux right now, and so on. And we feel discomfort over that because we want to understand those structures that we operate in. We really do, because it's partly how we understand ourselves. I mean, if you like everything that I hate and vice versa, we're going to have troubles with each other. Yeah, right.
This is wonderful, and we are going to thank Wendy and welcome her back to Philadelphia. But let's first let Al say a few announcements.
First, we need to take a minute to thank Wendy Steiner for this amazing presentation. Welcome home. And Heather Love, of course. We have lots of copies of this book, and I don't know if this is good news or bad news. We're selling them for $20, which is exactly what we paid for it, so we're not making any money here. So please buy yourself a copy. There are plenty of them, but don't wait, because they may all be gone. And I'm pretty sure Wendy would be fine inscribing your copy.
I might do that.
Okay. But what I would urge us to do in the, thinking about this place as a, haven of sociality is to let Wendy get back to the reception so that she can hang out there while you have her inscribe your book, so she's not pinned here. So we have this very nice reception awaiting you, and we hope that you will stay a long time and continue the conversation. So thanks again, Wendy Steiner. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy.
Jamal and colleagues, thank you so much. We'll see you soon at the Writers' House.